happen to be in the room, could they unmic and identify themselves? No, there's no evidence. They were supposed to show up in this class today, but there's no sign of them. Well, I'll have to get in touch with the tutoring service to see what the problem is. As I explained, I'm delaying the second assignment until the 15th to give you more time. And you should be getting the first assignment back toward the end of the week, so that you can sort of use whatever comments there are in terms of shaping your second assignment. Are there any questions about what I've said? Very good. So before I start on back on the narrative of India, I want to do another review question. And this question, this question, hello. This question deals with the decline of the Ottoman Empire. Hello? The decline of the Ottoman Empire. In answering this question, first of all, you want to talk about the decline in the quality of the sultans. You'll recall Mehmed II, Selim I, Solomon the Magnificent, were all jihadists. They all were expanding the empire in the name of Islam. But following the death of Solomon the Magnificent, this more or less ended, and the sultans withdrew into the harem, and the old aggressive policies of expansion sort of disappeared, at least until the end of the 17th, toward the end of the 17th century. And meanwhile, in terms of the court or the harem, you get a lot of signs of corruption, family favoritism, or what we call nepotism, and a lot of rivalry between different groups of women in the harem. Remember, it's filled with many women who are virtual prisoners, and they combine with the eunuchs, with the slaves, some of the ministers, and there's a lot of infighting, sometimes even assassinations occur. So there is the personal factor, the sultans and the harem, although very often when one sees personal difficulties at the top, you're looking for more structural reasons for problems. And certainly one problem that the empire had was its not merely religious nature, but its fundamentalist. Islam was a problem, and remember, I noted that no printing presses were allowed until the 18th century. The first printing presses occurred, and this was because it was regarded as sacrilegious. The Quran was written, was printed, and nothing should cast a shadow over the preeminence of the Quran. And I said, likewise, the clock towers, there were minarets and no clock towers allowed in the Ottoman Empire. Well, more substantially, we have the continuing rivalry between the Ottoman birth elite, the sons of the Ottoman elite, and the Janissaries, who come from these kidnapped children of the Christians in the Balkans, the so-called Devzerm elite versus the Ottoman elite. This division becomes very severe in the 17th century. Furthermore, another problem the Ottoman Empire had was that the Mediterranean, which at the beginning of the empire was the conduit, the road between Western Europe and the Middle East. By the end of the 16th century, the Mediterranean route is declining, and with it, the flow of silver through the Mediterranean declines at the beginning of the 17th century, and therefore the revenues of the Ottoman sultans decline. So instead of dealing with this in terms of what the West was doing, and that is to say, establishing mercantilist economic policies, boosting the economy by state-directed economic development in order to improve the tax revenues and therefore fund the military, the sultans simply increased taxation on the productive members of the society. The peasants, the craftsmen, the merchants were taxed more and more. And of course, this sapped the economic strength of, as I said, the productive elements in the society. In short, there was no economic development. And as decline continued, as I pointed out, it was particularly the Arab and Jewish merchants who suffered. The Christian merchants, the Armenians, and the Greeks did a little bit better because they were supported by the West Europeans. Another problem for the Ottoman Empire was the growing intrusion of the French, the Dutch, and the English, the Europeans. They arrived, their ships were powerful. The Ottoman Navy was no match for them. The sultans were coerced into signing so-called capitulation treaties, which gave the Europeans special rights, including exemptions from Ottoman law. And the Europeans were able to basically reverse the terms of trade in the sense that European manufacturers now began to flood into the Ottoman Empire and undercutting the merchants and manufacturers native to the Ottoman Empire. And so this kind of unequal exchange developed. We've already noticed this with respect to Latin America. The balance of trade shifted in favor of the West Europeans, and the Ottomans were constantly short of gold and silver or competitive goods to keep up with the Europeans. Another point and final point is the military. The military at the beginning of the 16th century, the Janissaries and the Ottoman cavalry was a match for the Europeans. But as time wore on, we know that the European armies became more and more sophisticated, and the Ottomans, the Janissaries and the cavalry resisted because they feared loss of their position, any kind of change in the military. So when Mehmed IV, trying to revive the tradition of Solomon the Magnificent, declared jihad, and the Ottomans did succeed in taking the island of Crete. It's a big island from the Venetians in 1649, but when they attacked Vienna in 1683, the result was a catastrophic defeat. at the hands of the Austrian Habsburgs and their allies. And from that point onwards, through the rest of the 18th century into the 19th century, we just have a continuous record of military defeat because the Ottomans, from a military point of view, to say nothing of their economy, were too weak. And so we do see that in the middle of the 18th century, the sultans did try, with the help of expatriate European officers, to try and create modern military units, but the Janissaries and the Ottomans undercut these units and nothing was done. And the result was that the Northern Balkans and Southern Russia and Ukraine, the Caucasus, all fell into the hands of the European powers. The last point I would make is that although it's clear that this was all part of a decline and the decline continued into the 19th century, it's important to say that it was a relative decline. That is to say, certainly the Ottoman Empire continued. There was even in the first part of the 19th century, with the Tanzimat, an attempt to structurally reform the Ottoman political and judicial structure. But compared to the West Europeans, the Ottoman Empire was falling further and further behind. Yet we should note that likewise, Italy and Spain, other Mediterranean powers were also in decline as well. So with that, we're done with that review question. Are there anything that arises from this account that you want clarification on, or any question? Okay.
Yeah. I was wondering about the due date.
Could you identify yourself?
Yes. My name is Jacob.
Yes, Jacob.
I was wondering about the due date change for the assignment. In the syllabus, it said November 29th, but you said you're moving it to the 15th.
No, I'm sorry, there was some confusion. That's a point worth discussing. It may be that there was a typo. I think there was a typo. And that the date for the second assignment didn't get put in. So I'm asking the class, would you prefer the 29th for the second assignment? Probably you would. You probably would because it's later. You'd have more time.
Yeah, I think that's the best idea because we were all under the impression.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm here, and I will send out an email confirming this. The 29th. Okay? 29th is better, and then the last essay will come in the last day of class, which I believe is, what is that? Is it the 12th of December? Is that the last day of class?
Yeah, something around there, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, anyway, the last day of class.
I think it's the 6th of December.
The 6th? Did you say?
Yes.
Okay, the 6th then would be the final copy. And of course, the real effort is the 29th. I mean, that's the breakthrough effort. That's when you have to put together an essay. The third assignment is a refinement, is a refinement of that essay. What I want to see is something that I could print, that you could print, you could publish. Something really, the grammar, the whole setup, the format, everything is, the spelling, everything in good order. And, so we'll see how that goes. Any other questions about this? Because it is important. Okay. So now I want to pick up the narrative, and we reached a point in the narrative. What I'm trying to do is sort of give you the narrative of the development of Hinduism, because the Hindus are conquered by the Arabs, by the Muslims, beginning in the 8th century AD, and subsequently they are subordinated within a succession of Muslim regimes, Muslim empires, until the arrival of the British. And yet Hinduism has become so entrenched that it survives. It survives the Muslim domination over India. So I said last time toward the end that it was really during the Dark Age between 600 and say 11 or 1200 that Hinduism fully consolidated itself in India. I mean, it starts way back. I even argued that you see elements of it in the Indus Valley civilization, but certainly with the Aryans, and then with the period of the kingdoms and the empire, it's all developing. But the final development, consolidation, comes during this so-called Dark Age. The Dark Age is initiated as a result of the second great invasion of India by the Huns. At the beginning of the 7th century, the Huns sweep away the Gupta Empire. The Gupta Empire, which was the culmination of the imperial period, of the period of the empires, comes to an end, and a Dark Age develops, because with the destruction by the Huns, all town life disappears, money disappears, and the only kind of political regimes that are left are small little kingdoms. This is sometimes referred to as the Dark Age, sometimes as a kind of Indian version of feudalism. Way back in the European Middle Ages, as you know, there was a kind of Dark Age where there was no money, there was no towns, and virtually no states. Well, this is similar in India, but the outcome is very different, because we see that in this period, the caste system, that's number one, the caste system is fully consolidated during this period of the Dark Ages. So number one, the caste system. And at the top of the caste system, of course, are the Brahmins, who now are both the political and socially dominant element in Indian society. And they tend to dominate all the local offices. These kings have local officials, all of them are Brahmins. So the Brahmins, they control the temples, they control the local offices. There are alongside them the so-called military elite, the Rajputs, in many places, but and they play an important part in Indian history, but it's mainly the Brahmins. So they're at the top, and then below them are these, as I say, these military landlord types. And then below them are the merchants and the farmers. And finally, we have the outcasts, later on known as the Dalits, the outcasts in Indian society, the laborers, the slaves, the people at the bottom of Indian society. And this setup, it's lasted until the present, basically, because although certainly in the 19th century with the British occupation, and then of course when India achieved its independence, the regime struggled valiantly to get rid of this caste system, but it persisted. And when the secular government sort of collapsed in India during the 1980s, basically a Hindu party came to ascendancy, and India is now under a kind of religious populist regime. This caste system has revived. And I must say that it's terribly debilitating because, I mean, the assumption of basic social equality between people is undercut by the persistence of this caste system. If you're a Brahmin at the top, that gives you a certain pedigree. You have entry um, in terms of the marriages. Somebody who's a Brahmin would not stoop to marry somebody from the lower caste, and people from the lower caste, their opportunities are limited because there are all these social prejudices against them. So it's stifling. And as a matter of fact, yesterday I was reading an article on the internet in which it said that even in North America, we have a situation in North America where people in the engineering and computer field, there are many South Asians in North American computer and IT and of various kinds in engineering. And what one finds is that the Brahmins in this North American industry, if they find out that somebody is from a Dalit background, they're prejudiced against them in terms of hiring. There are lawsuits now going through the courts in the United States over this kind of prejudice, which has been imported from India. So you can imagine how persistent these prejudices are. Much to be regretted. So we have the caste system, we have the Brahmins, and a third element, which is very important, is the fact that since there's no money in this economy, money doesn't circulate, towns have disappeared, you have basically village economies, and the villages are basically cut off from one another. They are what we call autarkic, self-sufficient villages at the base of this Brahmin-led caste village system. And what happens is most of the villagers are peasants. They produce a certain amount of surplus, and some of the surplus is basically exchanged by the peasants for shoes or cloth being produced by artisans in the village. In other words, there are artisans, shoemakers, candlestick makers, furniture makers, living beside the peasants. And a kind of barter economy exists between the artisans and the peasants in the villages. What this means is that the necessity to buy goods outside of the village is non-existent, and so you have a kind of it is true that it's self-sufficient, but it doesn't really develop. There is no exchange beyond the village, and so you have these autarkic, thousands and thousands of autarkic villages. Now, this is referred to as the Asiatic mode of production. It was referred to as that in the 19th century. And basically, it helps to explain the relative stagnation of the Indian economy in comparison to even the economy of the Middle East, and especially the economy of the West, because there was little or no development. In fact, there was little or no class conflict in Indian society because the caste system combined with the barter economy fundamentally blocked the development of classes. Now, classes, of course, are bad, but they lend economic classes, which we see in the West and we see even in China, the conflicts that occur because of class lend a certain dynamism to society, to Western society, and even to Chinese society, which we do not see in India. So that's what I would say about this period of the Dark Ages. Coming back to the the principal point I was making, which was Hinduism consolidated itself and survived the Islamic invasions. Now, in order to understand the invasion of Islam, we should note that fundamentally it comes in three waves. There are three waves of Islamic invasion. The first of these occurs in the 8th century and is relatively limited. The second wave comes at the end of the 10th and beginning of the 11th century, and the final wave at the beginning of the 16th century. So three waves with different consequences. The first in the 8th century, the second at the end of the 10th, beginning of the 11th century, and the third wave at the beginning of the 16th century. And with the third wave, of course, you have the establishment of the Mughal Empire, which we're going to focus on. Presumably, we'll get through this material at the end of the lecture, and we can focus on the Mughal Empire from Wednesday's lecture onward. In any case, the Arabs arose, they invaded the Mediterranean in the 7th century from Arabia, and they conquered the whole of the Middle East and North Africa, and they established the caliphates. I referred to those when I was dealing with the Ottoman Empire. So the Arab caliphates of the period from the 8th to the 11th century. Now, this was a spectacular takeover of the Middle East by the Arabs in the 7th century. And indeed, the aggressiveness of the Arab, partly inspired by the hope of booty and pillage, and partly inspired by Islam, it extended so far that in 711, an Arab army actually invaded Spain. And the Arabs took over Spain at the beginning of the 8th century, and they were going to remain there until 1492. We've encountered this before when dealing with Spain. It took the European Christians 700 years, 700 to 800 years to finally push the Arabs out of Spain in 1492. Well, that very same year, 711, another Arab army coming from Iraq and Afghanistan invaded India. An Arab general led an Arab army into the northwest of India, now the state of Pakistan. And this area was occupied from the 8th century onward by basically an Arab kingdom, took over this region here. This is, of course, today part of Pakistan. You see it on the map right here. But this invasion was limited because there is a great desert here located around here, and the Hindu kingdoms were strong enough at this point to effectively block further Arab advance at this stage. But when you get to the 10th and beginning of the 11th century, the situation changes. Because on the one hand, these Hindu kingdoms have now become very weak. Their ability to resist is limited. And there is a buildup, not so much of Arabs, but of Turkish warriors begin to develop on the borders of Afghanistan in the course of the 10th and early 11th century. More and more Turkish invaders begin to build up on the borders of India. This is partly based on the fact that Central Asia is becoming overpopulated and dehydrated, and the populations there, the Turks, are looking for more and more. They're looking for more and more grazing lands for their flocks, and they're attracted, of course, by the legendary fertility of India. And so, if I can find this, yes, this will do. In the course of the 10th and beginning of the 11th century, the Turks begin to, coming from Afghanistan, they descend into India. And this process, they push further and further south. Finally, in this individual, Muhammad of Ghur, who, these invaders are Turks. Muhammad of Ghur basically becomes the general, the leader of all of these Turkish forces. And in 1192, in a very important battle, the Hindu states are decisively defeated, and all of India lies open to the Turks, who of course are Muslims. And following this battle, the Turks, the Turkish Muslims, establish what's called the Delhi Sultanate. The Delhi Sultanate, which endures from 1200 to 1526. And that's what we're discussing right now. The Delhi Sultanate. Now, this conquest was quite brutal. Many Hindu temples were destroyed. Hundreds of thousands of people perished, apparently, in this takeover on the part of the Muslims. And I would say, although they try today to play this down for political reasons, because it exacerbates tensions between Muslims and Hindus, there seems to be no question, but there was a lot of bloodshed and a lot of destruction, particularly of Hindu religious temples during this takeover. The only, we see one other, after this, things settled down for a long time until the late 17th century between the Hindus and the Muslims. But these events are referred to by Hindu nationalists, and Hindu nationalism seeking its revenge against the Muslim population even today will mention these events. In any case, the capital of the new Muslim empire in India is the city of Delhi, which is basically located here. Of course, today, this city is the capital of India. New Delhi is the capital of India. Well, this was the capital of the Delhi Sultanate, 1200 to 1526, and the emperor was obviously the Sultan, the religious leader, as well as the political leader of this entity. And you can see that at its largest extent, it covered virtually the whole of the Indian subcontinent at its height. Well, this is true, but as a matter of fact, the Delhi Sultanate, of course, millions of people. First of all, there was a steady immigration of Turks and Arabs into India during this period. The Muslim population increased steadily. There were lots of conversions, many Hindus who were part of the lower castes. I've explained how exploitative the caste system was at the expense of the lower castes in Indian society. Many of these people, especially in Northeast India and Northwest India, the present Muslim states of Pakistan and Bangladesh, these people converted from Hinduism to Islam because Islam stood for a certain social equality. And getting out of the Hindu system meant liberation for many of the lower castes. So there was, under the Delhi Sultanate, a certain conversion of people from Hinduism to Islam. Also, we see the same thing in some of the big cities in central India. Merchants and artisans who come from the lower caste will also become Muslim because, again, escaping the caste system is very important to them. On the other hand, once the first stage of the conquest was accomplished, the Muslims and the Hindus more or less got along with one another during the Delhi Sultanate. I would say that as a generalization, that is true. There was little or no conflict in a religious sense between the two groups after the initial conquest. And a certain fusion of cultures took place. And indeed, the old Hindu elites, and here we come back to the Dark Age, the Muslims needed the cooperation of the Hindu elites, the Brahmins, and the military Rajputs in order to collect tribute from the villages, because the Hindu elites were the only ones who had direct access to the villages. And so the Muslims relied on the Hindu elite in order to extract tribute from these self-sufficient villages. And so a kind of cooperation developed between the Muslim and the Hindu elites during the Delhi Sultanate. Another feature of this period that we should mention is the revival of town life during the Delhi Sultanate. Remember, I explained that during the Dark Age, there were no towns, there was no money economy. Well, with the Arab and now the Turkish invasion and establishment of the Delhi Sultanate, towns came back. Islam is associated with town life. Islam is a religion based on trade and urban life. And so it redeveloped in India under the Delhi Sultanate. And so this was the situation. Now, I want to note that there was one place in India, and I can identify it here, right here in gray, you see it, that this remained an independent Hindu kingdom. An Indian kingdom did persist, despite the fact that the Delhi Sultanate occupied most of the continent. There was in central India an entity called the Vishayanagara Kingdom, which was Hindu. And all through the Delhi Sultanate, it retained a certain independence. That should be noted. Now, having introduced you to the Delhi Sultanate, I now want to turn to the main, our main concern, the Mughal Empire. Remember I said that the first wave of Islamic invasion was the 8th century, then the 10th and 11th century, the second wave, and the beginning of the Mughal Empire sees yet another Islamic Turkish invasion. The end of the 15th, beginning of the 16th century, a new wave of Turks invades, and they displace the Delhi Sultanate, which has gotten weak and divided, and a new centralized empire, the founder of which was the first emperor of the Mughal Empire was a man by the name of Babur. And he consolidated this empire in 1526. Let me find my place. Yes, and this Mughal Empire, as you see, lasted until the middle of the 18th century when the British took over India. Now, the greatest of the Mughal emperors was Akbar, 1556 to 1605. He was the greatest of the Mughal emperors, and we're going to concentrate on him because under him, basically the Mughal Empire reached its classical formation. We know a lot about the reign of Akbar, and so we're focusing on the setup as it was under Akbar. Well, in the first place, I want to talk about the fact that Akbar was a very unusual man in the sense that, remember how militant the Muslims could be. Well, under, that is to say, intolerant of, they had their religious advisors, and there was a certain intolerance to the monotheism of Islam. But Akbar was a very different character. He realized that, in fact, most of his subjects were Hindus, but he also encountered Westerners, particularly the Portuguese. Remember, the Portuguese established their colony of Goa and also Diu on the western side of the Indian subcontinent. Well, Akbar tried to get along with the Christians and the Hindus. And as one of the entertainments at the court, he would invite Muslim scholars to debate Christian scholars and Hindu scholars about the virtues of their different religions. And Akbar actually went so far as to establish what he called a divine cult, independent of all three religions, independent even of Islam. He was not prepared to completely submit to the Sunni scholars at the court, the imams, the so-called imams at the court. And he tried to introduce a more liberal, tolerant, monotheistic religion at his court, where there would be basic tolerance between the three religious groups, which really is, I mean, when you think that the fact that the West Europeans are still in the midst of their religious wars, this is a remarkable thing for him to have done. Now, the basis of his rule were the 500 leading military officers of the army, as well as, of course, the main administrators in the court. Now, these 500 leading military men and top administrators were called the Mansabdars. The Mansabdars. And they were the basically in control of the different provinces of India. And they were the ones, along with the court, who were able to extract from the villages. Remember, I said there were tens, if not hundreds of thousands of villages in India. There were the Brahmins at the top, and they collected taxes from the villagers. They taxes in kind, which were ultimately translated into money. Well, 3/5, listen to this, 3/5 of the taxes collected at the local level fell into the hands of the emperor or the Mansabdars. In other words, a huge amount of the surplus produced in Indian society in the villages was transferred upwards into the hands of these Mansabdars and into the hands of the emperor, which meant that they had enormous surpluses to maintain a huge army, but also to engage in luxury expenditure. And that is one of the most notable features of the Mughal Empire. The fantastic luxury expenditure on palaces, on temples, on incredibly fine paintings, on ceramics, on glassware of every description, of fine textiles. The luxury consumption of the Indian elite, especially these Mansabdars and the emperor, was legendary. I would call it a kind of super exploitation of the Indian population. And it produced a incredibly luxurious Mughal culture, which we will speak about next time. Another feature of this empire that needs to be noted is that it had very close connections with the Ottoman Empire and the Persian Empire. There was free trade between the three great Muslim empires during the 16th and 17th century. Merchants came and went right through this empire, and there was a certain prosperity based on this luxury consumption and production during this period. And the empire, in fact, the Mansabdar elite itself was composed of not merely Turks, but also Persians and Ottomans, who basically arrived and put their services at the disposition of the emperor. So I would say this Mughal culture was both, it was Turkish, it was Persian, and it was Indian at one and the same time, Indian Muslim. And so was the elite. It was kind of mixed. And at the same time, at the lower rungs, we should realize that the Hindus had their place as well. The Hindus, always subordinate, let's get that clear. The Muslims were on top. Nevertheless, the Hindus were indispensable as soldiers, as merchants, as people with contacts with the villages. And so they had a subordinate place within the Mughal Empire. Now, one thing I should note finally in sort of winding this up was that there was little connection with the West. I'll speak about this next time. So we'll see you on Wednesday.